It was the pivotal day of World War II, the most massive military operation in history. 160,000 Allied infantrymen converged on the beaches of Normandy to break through the impenetrable walls of German-held Fortress Europe. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944. Walter Martinez, a sergeant in the 2nd Ranger Battalion, was among those in the first wave to hit the beaches. 14 German divisions were waiting for them on the battlefront. In 1942, an armada of American and British warships heads for North Africa to make the first Allied amphibious landing of World War II. Pushing back the Axis powers, the Allies now have their first foothold on foreign soil. From the moment when the Allied armies begin pushing back the German army, the ultimate goal has been to invade France. To do so, the Allies need to break through Hitler's formidable seawall. For 4 years, he has been building this barrier of concrete, steel, and artillery all along the Atlantic coast of France. September 1943, the American 1st Division, the Big Red One, lands at Liverpool. Veterans of landings in Africa and Sicily, they joined the 1,500,000 Americans gathering in England for the invasion of Europe. Among them is 22-year-old Walter Martinez with the 2nd Ranger Battalion.
They broke our outfits up, and when we went there to England, we were what you call like replacement, repa depots. And when we got there, we were filling in different outfits, you know, to bring him up to strength, because some of these outfits, particularly mine, they had fought in Anzio and Salerno. So in England, they came around to the repo depots looking for us, very new from the state, even though some of us had 2 and 3 years to fill in these outfits, but the Ranger outfit was strictly a volunteer. Rangers as a whole, they spearhead for outfits. Spearhead means that you have to break through.
To prepare Operation Overlord, as Churchill has named the invasion, 16 million tons of weaponry will have arrived into England by invasion time. Meanwhile, Allied troops are subjected to the most rigorous training they have ever known.
I was trained real hard. We learned how to jump, using all kinds of TNT dynamite to blow up for railroad tracks behind the lines, and most anything that had to do with combat, we were pretty well trained. The rifles and guns like that, we knew pretty well, but just tactics. As a matter of fact, the British liaison, they used to say, you guys trained harder than the war actually is, and some of these guys knew because they had fought in North Africa. The people who trained me were Rangers, and sometimes I wonder if I was more afraid of them than I was of the Germans, because these guys were really tough and rugged. We had boxing tournaments within the battalions and division regimentals, and if you boxed, they give you 3 days off in London so you can cure your wounds.
Across the English Channel, the Germans continue to fortify their strength. Since its conception, the Atlantic Wall has been Hitler's obsession. Thousands of laborers have worked to forge its guns, machine gun bunkers, and concrete obstacles, which have made it into a fearsome barricade. The wall would even be stronger if Germany's commander-in-chief in the West, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, believed in it as much as Hitler. With 2,000 miles of coastline to defend, von Rundstedt believes that an army can't cover every inch equally. Assuming the initial Allied landing is successful, von Rundstedt plans to move his powerful reserve forces to that location and drive the invasion army back into the sea. Hitler's decorated Field Marshal Erwin Rommel is ordered to France in late 1943 to conduct an inspection tour of the Atlantic defenses. Rommel concludes that the success of Rundstedt's defense depends on air cover. However, the beleaguered Luftwaffe can no longer guarantee that, so he urges drastic revisions. In January 1944, Rommel is given principal responsibility for the coast defense. Convinced that the invasion team must be destroyed before it ever gets across the beaches, Rommel orders every gap in the wall closed. The high water line, he says, must be the main fighting line. Rommel sets about fortifying the approaches. He orders the construction of submerged obstacles, concrete protrusions, spikes, and mines to slow the landing. On the beaches, the artillery is roofed and walled with concrete, laced together with miles of barbed wire. 4 million landmines are buried in the Normandy sand. For the next 7 miles back, every open area is flooded or planted with obstacles to frustrate any airborne landing. Every available soldier, from baker to clerk, is called into service. The first 24 hours of the landing will be decisive. Even with troop strength depleted by the demands of the Russian front and the Allied landings at Anzio, 14 German divisions are lined up and waiting by the middle of May. One of them is the Panzer Lehr that is brought in from Hungary.
Well, the Panzer Lehr was one of the crack divisions of the German army, and it had been brought to Normandy almost at full strength. They only had 2 weeks to prepare for the fighting in Normandy, but the Panzer Lehr was in good shape. It had armaments, it had Tiger tanks, it had personnel, and it was, in fact, perhaps the best fighting division in the German army.
The actual deployment of the Panzer Lehr at Normandy creates a division in the German High Command.
The great debate in the German defenses was between Rundstedt and Rommel. And Rundstedt believed that to stop the invasion, you would have to allow the troops to get ashore, and then, when they were ashore but could not get out of the pocket, hit them with everything you had. In other words, to allow the landings to occur and then hit the troops once they were ashore. Rommel, on the other hand, felt that the only way to stop the invasion was to hit the troops on the beaches before they could get ashore.
To boost morale, General Dwight D. Eisenhower visits the troops in England.
Whenever you saw somebody of high brass come near the battle area, it was impressive, and we always found him to be a well-spoken guy. He didn't look as rough to us as the man who he really was when he had to make that fateful decision, D-Day.
To keep the Germans confused about the invasion point, the Allies staged numerous probing maneuvers up and down the French coast. At dawn, June 1st, the morning is gray and dull. It also marks the beginning of the worst weather in 30 years. Bad news for the Allies. The invasion is dependent on the tide for troop landings, moonlight for the airborne, and calm seas. The simultaneous beginning of a new Russian offensive designed to preoccupy the Germans has been set. All this planning depends on the weather. The odds are against the Allies from the start. The British are assigned to 2 beaches, codenamed Gold and Sword. The Canadians are assigned to one named Juno. The Americans get 2 named Omaha and Utah. These 5 beaches of Normandy form an 80-mile strip along the Atlantic Wall. Finally, on the morning of June 5th, after already calling the ships back once because of bad weather, General Eisenhower makes the agonizing decision to go, and the greatest invasion in history is underway. The Allied probing maneuvers have created confusion within German intelligence.
The Allies had carefully planted phony information for a year before the invasion. They had been bombing the Pas-de-Calais regularly, and that's the shortest route across the Channel. The Normandy route is considerably longer.
The weather odds are also analyzed by Field Marshal Rommel. On June 5th, he leaves his headquarters to go home for his wife's birthday, convinced the Allies will never land in bad weather. But Allied forces are preparing to deliver Rommel a surprise. June 6, 1944. The seas in the Channel are typically rough as the armada of 5,300 ships move toward an obstacle that separates Europe from its liberation. Overhead, thousands of fighter planes. Also, hundreds of troop transports and gliders carrying the paratroop vanguard of the invasion. The conditions are not ideal for the invasion. The waves are high and the clouds are threatening. But the loading of the convoys goes on following General Eisenhower's orders.
At that time, we had no emotion, no feeling. We just were so tense in the job that was before us that about any order he gave, we would have followed.
What the Germans saw was a sight that had never been seen before and will never be seen again. An invasion of such dimensions as to be almost incredible. The sea was full of ships. The first question was, is this the real invasion? The men who were on the beaches, who saw those 5,000 ships, knew very well that this was the real invasion. But the intelligence reports back in Berlin left the question as to whether this was the real thing. There was always the question in Hitler's mind and the minds of the other commanders, was this the real thing, or was this just to draw the panzers away from the Pas-de-Calais, where the real invasion would follow?
Loaded with 32 men each, the landing craft start their run for the beach.
You have a lot of thoughts. What bothered me the most was that we were so jammed, and a lot of guys got seasick, so we had to walk to the mess. Let me put it this way, it was very uncomfortable. The motion sickness was actually taking its toll. Guys were ready to swim in if they had to.
It was an armada, the greatest armada ever put together in the history of the world. And when the Germans saw it, they could only marvel at it, and they knew that the war was over. There's a marvelous comment in Cornelius Ryan's book on D-Day, in which one of the German officers who survived said later, "When I saw that, I knew it was the end for Germany."
For the 8 companies of men approaching Omaha Beach, the nightmarish obstacles Rommel has planted begin to pay off for the Germans. Here the struggle is the fiercest. Omaha Beach is 6 miles of hell, with 100-foot cliffs at either end.
The outfits, like the big red one and the 29th that hit the beach, they got a chance to see the silhouette and the pillboxes there were, particularly one giant pillbox. There was a little bit of everything. There was a little bit of confusion. There is a little fear there, but you don't recognize it. I think the confusion overwhelms in the commotion and the confusion. And you don't function like a human being, you function more like a machine.
Amid sinking tanks and exploding landing craft, raked by relentless machine gun fire, many of the men are mowed down before they even hit the sand.
The Germans were so completely outnumbered and had no air support whatsoever. Complete control of the air for the Allies. I think it was something like 2 German planes in the air that day, so that the Germans really didn't have a chance, and they knew it.
While landing at Omaha Beach turns into disaster, Utah Beach is nearly the opposite. The U.S. 4th Division lands there with little resistance and moves rapidly inland. At Juneau Beach, the high seas and German defenses are frustrating the Canadians. The sandy strip is marked with the dead and dying of both sides. Sword Beach is small, but because it is a naval port, it is guarded by heavy gun emplacements. Weather and terrain take many casualties from the British First Wave. At Gold Beach, amphibious tanks are vital in wiping out enemy gun emplacements. The men are not fighting alone. 10,000 flights of aircraft battered German defenses with more than 11,000 tons of bombs. Of all the beaches, Omaha is where the battle is fiercest and results in the most casualties.
That was the hard area there where they had cut railroad tracks and they had buried them in an angle, so when our gliders went in there, they took a tremendous toll of our people. It was a hell of a stench of gunfire, a lot of wreckage on that beach, a lot of bodies.
German air strength had been moved out of Normandy just a few days before. They had been pulled back for rest, recreation, and repair, so that the German fighting strength was less than it would have been even a few days before.
In my case, I wasn't prone to hike. What I saw was rugged rocks, which we hit a lot. We fired hooks to climb up on ropes to go up to the top. But we were supposed to knock out some heavy German artillery pieces up on top of that hill. When we got up there wasn't any. They had already moved them out. When we got up there, a lot of snipers. They were retreating. Evidently, that was the last of the working crew, wherever they moved those guns that they had.
Also, there was another factor on D-Day. Rommel was not present to command the German troops on the beaches. And also, the panzers were held back for 10 hours because Hitler couldn't make the decision to commit them.
With troops moving inland everywhere, it is apparent that the Allies' gamble has paid off. Although nobody knows the exact figure, approximately 160,000 men are ashore by the end of D-Day. The beachhead is secure.
It was really, say, well, what I went through, and I'm here. You know, it's a weird feeling that's very hard to explain. I'm here.
The invasion of Normandy would signal the death knell for German domination of Europe. For that prize, nearly 4,000 men would give their lives on Omaha Beach alone. By day's end, Germans are surrendering or in retreat. Their Reich is beginning to crumble. Looking back on the beachhead, soldiers will remember this landing as the longest day. Near the end of World War II, the Germans had crossed back into their homeland. Now they had to defend their own borders. The Rhine River was a natural barrier that became their last defense. Every bridge over the Rhine was a battle zone, and in particular, the bridge at Remagen. Nate Whitman was with the United States Army on the Rhine. It was here that he met the enemy on the battlefront. By the fall of 1944, the Allies are sweeping across Europe, pushing the Germans out of France, then Holland and Belgium. They are rolling over the German army so quickly that General George Patton's tanks are running out of gasoline. The overall objective is to thrust into the Ruhr Valley, followed by a linking up with the Russians, who are advancing from the east. Throughout the campaign, the Allies take over 50,000 German prisoners. As the desperate German army falls back to its homeland, Hitler orders a fight to the death. One great natural obstacle bars the Allied army's way into the German heartland, the Rhine River. The Germans firmly believe that this mighty river will protect them. Not since Napoleon, 150 years earlier, has an invading army been able to cross it. Although there are many bridges across the Rhine, the retreating Germans are ordered to destroy every one that the advancing Allied force might approach. Halfway between Bonn and Koblenz on the Rhine, one bridge is still far enough behind the lines to escape destruction. It's the Ludendorff Railway Bridge at Remagen.
So first of all, they had the order to defend the bridge, and then if they found out that the Allied forces will cross the bridge anyway, then the order was to destroy the bridge from German side. There was only one thing Hitler still had in mind, to fight as long as possible.
The Allied assault is divided into two parts. In the north, an army of British and American troops drive east through the Low Countries. This army has been selected by General Dwight D. Eisenhower to make the first spectacular leap across the Rhine and head for Berlin. Supporting the British drives are two American armies in France. One is under the command of General Patton. Their assignment is to destroy all German forces west of the Rhine. One American soldier with the Allies is Nathan Whitman.
We went wherever they sent us. Even though we were in the Third Army, we went with the First Army. We went with the British Eighth Army. Every tank had a name on it and a big star. Driving that tank wasn't like a car. You maneuvered it with your feet, like a bulldozer. And we had to have one guy guide you. We just didn't walk into a town. We surveyed it for a long time and made sure we knew what we were going to do or had to do. But still, you can't watch everything. We lost a lot of guys to sniping. Very seldom did I ever have a barrage come after us when we were moving ahead. We moved so fast and so rapid that the Germans were so busy retreating, honestly.
As the German front crumbles, the Nazi high command resorts to desperate measures.
What was considered the Volkssturm, or people who were really drafted, who were older than the normal age to serve in the military. And, of course, the most tragic situation was for the young people. Even 14, 15-year-old people were drafted. Deserters, of course, were shot right away. And then older people who refused to fight in the Volkssturm were shot too.
To get to the Rhine, the army must move through rubble-strewn towns, taking out German holding positions.
They had 75-ton tanks. They had those Mark V tanks. Once they knocked the track off of it, well, that's when they would knock the tanks out. It wasn't easy. You have to hit it in the right place. When we were on the move and fighting, I never once thought about dying or getting killed. It never entered my mind. We didn't have time for that, really. We always had something to do. Every town we went into, we checked for booby traps. We had to disarm every place we went. We just blew the whole town up. It didn't bother us. You know, we were in 8 battles, and it didn't bother us. It was just another battle, that was all. And we didn't care because Patton, he wiped everything in front of him clean. When he said, "You're not going to have any opposition," he knew what he was talking about. You could see their army was busted up. They didn't have an army. After the Battle of the Bulge, when it was over, when we broke the tank battle down, why, it was just about finished. And then they had the Russians to put up with. They had to send people down to fight the Russians. So we kind of knew that it was just a matter of time, short time.
By the end of February 1945, melting snow and blown-up German dams have turned the roads into rivers of mud. Bogged down, the advancing American armor and infantry slow to a crawl.
There was one junction had 4 roads, and we were going to use them all. But it got so muddy and so bogged down that they had to take one tank at a time through. You want to see a sight, see 300-400 tanks plugging their way through the muck. It was really something.
With no hope of finding a bridge standing, the Allies themselves try to knock out all bridges at long range and trap the retreating Germans on the west side of the Rhine.
It was easier to retreat within Germany because they knew the places, so they went back to the east side of the Rhine. And then, of course, the order was to destroy the bridge of Remagen. I think they wanted to wait until many people of the Allied forces are on the bridge.
To get to the Rhine and cross it. But that was our main object to begin with, one of the main objects, because the British 8th Army was moving in behind us as a backup.
Through the small towns of Germany moves a convoy of pontoons, landing crafts, and assault boats of every size and description. They are all headed for the Rhine. The Americans finally arrive at a position near the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, which is still standing. They must determine whether it is safe enough to send armor and men over it. Their objective to cross it is a dangerous mission. It can either be a shortcut to victory or to death. March 7th, 1945, a platoon of the American 9th Armored Division reaches the bridge at Remagen, Germany. The Germans, with their command post on the east side of the Rhine, make last-minute preparations to blow up the bridge. In addition to the regular demolitions, an extra emergency charge is planted near the east end of the bridge. The American commanding officer of the tank platoon overlooking the river is unsure of their next move. Do they knock out the bridge or try to protect it? Finally, the high command gives the order to get as many troops across the river as possible, while the bridge is still standing. "20 minutes after 3 in the afternoon, the German bridge guards decide the Americans have come close enough. The attempt to blow up the bridge fails. The Germans now try to set off the emergency charge. To their dismay, the well-constructed bridge, although damaged, still stands. Now the GIs face a common problem at the time, defusing the German charges.
We spend a lot of time disarming whatever was on the bridge. They placed their charges where the weakest part of the bridge was. They really didn't have time to do a good job on the bridges. The closer we got to Berlin, the sloppier it got.
With the bridge defused, U.S. troops attempt to cross it.
We had an artillery backup, maybe 300 cannon backup. And we had our General Sherman tanks, right in position just in case they did get across.
The first infantrymen make it over the river. It's the beginning of a beachhead across the Rhine. All afternoon, the infantry streams in, reinforcing the precarious beachhead. Shortly after 5, the German garrison at Remagen surrenders. By the end of the day, American tanks are ready to try the bridge.
It was a very strong bridge and also very important for military forces because you cannot roll over with tanks over all the bridges. But this bridge was very strong, so the Allied forces could roll over with tanks, and so that's why it was so important to destroy this bridge as a desperate decision.
March 8th, the Germans respond to the invasion. The Luftwaffe sends in a squadron of Stukas. One of the heaviest concentrations of American anti-aircraft fire has been assembled to repulse them. Hitler, enraged by the Allied crossing of the Rhine, orders everything from demolition divers to V-2 rockets launched against the bridge. The V-2s will kill 3 American soldiers. The divers will all be taken prisoner. With the capture of the bridge, Allied orders are suddenly changed up and down the entire front. General Eisenhower orders his commanders to funnel every piece of equipment that the bridge will hold across the river. It is one of his happiest moments of the war. Eisenhower boasts, "We are across the Rhine." To handle the traffic, the engineers throw pontoon and Bailey bridges across the river. Transports are brought in to carry back the wounded. The sudden crossing of the Rhine is as disastrous to German morale as it is uplifting to Allied spirits. Eisenhower would later write, "We knew then that the enemy's final defeat was just around the corner."
The German morale at that time was already very low. And of course, it was just another indication that the war is over and that the war was lost.
Suddenly, on March 17th, 10 days after its capture, without any warning, the crippled bridge collapses into the river. 27 of the engineers who have been working to repair it are killed, and 63 others are injured. The Allied crossing comes to a halt. Those soldiers already on the German side of the Rhine are cut off and must face the fury of the enemy on their own.
We knew that they were getting ready for a final last charge, but nothing was going to hold us back. It was impossible. We kept on going, running forward. Our infantry captured hundreds. They were giving up by whole companies. They didn't want to fight anymore. Once a couple of their officers were shot and killed, they just surrendered. There was nobody to tell them what to do. Like us, we knew what to do.
There was only the question, how will Hitler end the war? Will he surrender so that the fighting would stop? Or will he go on what he did until all of Germany was occupied and still many more people were killed? Only a few fanatics still believed that Germany could win the war.
There was no laughter in Germany. The civilians were all kept in their homes. The soldiers were outside the homes and the civilians were in the homes. I guess they had enough fighting. For one thing, they were starving because Hitler was a maniac. His own people didn't like him, most of them, civilian people. He wouldn't let them leave their towns, their villages, or anything. Made them stay. They were practically prisoners in their own country. It was something to see. You go into a city and there were groups of soldiers, German soldiers with their guns on the ground, standing in groups of 5 and 6 with their hands on their head, waiting to be taken in and fed.
Nathan Whitman would continue into Berlin with the United States Army. The crossing of the Rhine has great significance for the Americans and the Germans. For the GIs, it is the final push into Germany, which will take them to Berlin and the end of the war. For the Germans, it is their last step to defeat. In a village cemetery not far from the Rhine crossing point are 4 graves that are memorials to the battle. Each grave holds a German officer, the victims of a scapegoating court-martial after the Remagen fiasco. They have been shot in the back of the neck to placate the Führer's anger. But their pointless deaths have done nothing to affect Germany's devastating loss. Less than 2 months after the Rhine crossing, on April 26, 1945, soldiers of the American Army and their Russian allies meet deep in Germany at Torgau, on the banks of the Elbe River. After only 12 years, Hitler's prediction of a 1,000-year Reich has evaporated. February 19, 1945. American forces land on the shores of Iwo Jime. What starts as a plan to take the island in a matter of days becomes a protracted battle with entrenched Japanese infantrymen willing to fight to the death. For each square foot, Iwo Jime will become one of the bloodiest battlegrounds of World War II. Howard Baxter was with the 5th Marine Division. It was here that he would live through hell on earth, on the battlefront. By late 1944, American forces had been taking back islands of the Pacific from the Japanese. Only 600 miles south of Tokyo lies the tiny island of Iwo Jime, a volcanic speck in the ocean. On December 8, 1944, American B-24s call on the island. The Japanese have been using Iwo Jime to stage raids on American B-29 bases in the Marianas. Admiral Nimitz makes it a top priority: neutralize Iwo Jime and take it in February. For 74 days, American bombers hammer the island. February 12, 1945, an armada of 485 American ships are about to begin the invasion of Iwo Jime. The strike force is to join Admiral Raymond Spruance's Fifth Fleet. It is the most powerful naval force in history that is assembled under one flag. The invasion is set to commence on February 19th. 3 Marine divisions make up the assault force. The 4th and 5th divisions are to go in first and blaze the trail. Aboard the ships are 75,000 assault Marines. Among them is graphic artist Howard Baxter, who is trained as a parachutist.
I was still a private first class, and I was, when they dissolved the Paramarines and the Marine Raiders, they dissolved them, and we formed the basic corps of the 5th Marine Division, most of us. I was in infantry. I was a Browning automatic rifleman, what they referred to as a BAR man. We never knew we were going to hit Iwo Jime until we were aboard ship a couple of weeks. And then they brought out these clay model maps that would show a miniature version of the island. And that's when they then told us what we'd be hitting and how well they were dug in, all the tunnel caves and everything that were there. We thought about 5 or 7 days was estimated at. We had 3 divisions that they were committing. 2 initially to make the beachhead, and the 3rd in reserve, which amounted to approximately 60,000 men, plus reinforcements. The island at the longest point was 7 miles. The volcano sat at the one end. The narrowest point was half a mile wide.
But Iwo Jime is of strategic importance. It would provide a much-needed emergency landing strip for the crippled American B-29s returning from Japanese bombing raids. Commanding the island's defense is one of the Japanese High Command's toughest officers, Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kurabayashi. In June 1944, he is sent to Iwo with a mission to save the island or die fighting. In the next 3 months, he moves in guns, tanks, and troops, doubles the size of his fighting force, and does his best to render the island impregnable. Men arrive at the rate of 500 a day. By October, 21,000 troops are on the island. The Japanese laborers work under horrendous conditions in sweltering heat to fortify Iwo Jime. Kurabayashi has decided on the best mode of defense for Iwo Jime. There will be none of the typically Japanese banzai charges, no suicide counterattacks at the beachheads. The commander has ordered his troops to mount a static defense with everybody dug in. He divides the island into separate defensive sectors, then rings each one with guns, mortars, landmines, and bunkers 5 feet thick. Underground, the island is a honeycomb of rock and cement. 5 levels of tunnels, most of them 30 feet below ground, connect the entire complex. When the attack comes, any advance will be made over dead Japanese bodies. American commanders are aware that such a huge fleet movement will not be a secret. Japanese spotter planes and submarines track it every nautical mile. Kurabayashi is alerted to the approaching invasion. Japanese intelligence estimates it will start between February 15th to the end of the month. The Japanese are braced to fight to the very end. Every soldier knows the importance of holding off the Americans. It's 6 a.m. on February 16th, and American bombing runs continue.
Made us feel real good to have those battery opening up there and blowing things to smithereens. We also saw what the battleships and the cruisers were doing to the volcano there. They were knocking out whole hunks of it into landslides. We thought they were doing a real terrific job.
Finally, the day of the invasion, February 19th, 1945. American intelligence estimates the Marines will be facing over 22,000 soldiers.
You actually try to numb your feelings. I know I did. You just don't know what's going to happen. You know that this can be a rough one. You know, you're out quite a ways, and slowly you're getting closer and closer and closer, and the roar of the motor of the Higgins boats and the landing craft, the spray and salt spray. So the surf gets kind of rough, and all of that water swirling around from all the other boats in the water. You have to get used to being there. You have to get your physical and psychological machinery going to where you have to do what you have to do. Everything in you wants to run, wants to get out of there. But you can't do that. They put you there, and you got to fight your way out. That's what you have to do.
From their bunkers, the Japanese monitor the approaching force. The final signal is given. After 74 days of constant bombardment, the Marines expect a shattered island with a demoralized defense. The troops who land are betting their lives that the bombing worked.
The first wave hit at 8 o'clock. The first three waves didn't catch much fire because the enemy was still hunkered down in their pillboxes and their caves and tunnels because naval gunfire was keeping them down. But they had to lift that naval gunfire and aerial protection, the bombing and strafing, because when we get friendly forces, then you don't want to hit your own forces with a covering fire. I landed in the 11th wave, which was 2 hours after the main force. Once we hit the beach, I almost stepped on a landmine when I came off the landing craft. And unfortunately, I saw it in time and stepped around it. And that's when the enemy comes out and mans their guns and cannons and everything starts opening up. So from about the fourth wave on, it's when all hell broke loose on the beach. Down near the base of the volcano, up till midway, was that black sulfuric sand. You would sink about halfway up to your knees and then that stuck. That's why you couldn't move around too fast. Just had to slog through it. You know? In fact, you couldn't sit in your foxhole too long at a time because the sulfur would heat your buttocks up too fast. It was mainly machine gun fire following us all through mortar fire, artillery fire, running and burying your nose and face into that black sulfuric sand.
Marines find out that Japanese defenses have not been diminished by 3 months of bombing. Although the Marines outnumber the Japanese on Iwo Jime, they are pinned down by the enemy's gunfire.
An attacking force has to be larger than the defending force. You're going to lose more men in attacking than you will defending. Not only do you advance over the enemy's bodies, you advance over your own men's bodies. That's the only way you can do it. They were a smaller force, but they were really dug in. The tunneling and the caves gave them the protection. And with all of that bombardment, they were dug deep. Every inch of that land had to be fought for. We had 20 landing craft off of our troop ship. Only one of them ever came back. All the rest were destroyed on the beach from artillery and mortar fire. I can remember lying on the beach and looking back over my shoulder and seeing an LC I had blown to bits from the artillery.
Under fire, the Marines are unable to achieve their objective of taking the volcanic cone of Iwo Jime, Mount Suribachi.
Our first night was spent alongside the airfield that they had, and the artillery fire that came in on us was just something else. You sleep out of the exhaustion, but even then your sleep is broken because when you got night infiltration, artillery fire, mortar fire, or the enemy decides to attack, your sleep is disturbed. And then it's hard to get back, you get keyed up, and it's hard to get back to sleep.
Finally, the Marines call for help. Suddenly, the sky is filled with American planes bombing Mount Suribachi. The Japanese can do nothing but wait. During the heat of battle, the Navy gives their code name for Mount Suribachi. They call it Hot Rocks. On day 2, the order comes down to take Mount Suribachi. After constant shelling of the Japanese fortifications, the Marines inch off the beach. After 4 days, a small contingent of U.S. Marines moves toward the summit. The capture of Mount Suribachi is by no means a decisive victory. The main Japanese force remains intact, but it does have a morale-building effect on Americans.
Once the word came back that the flag had been raised and we saw it fluttering up there, we thought, well, maybe this thing will be over pretty quick now that they got the flag there. When you're in combat, you're always hoping the next day it's going to end because you're losing men every day. Plus you're always, you have the thought in the back of your mind that you could go at any second. So you're never really at rest. Your eyes are constantly looking.
After 6 days on the island, it's a time for worship. Somehow, with machine guns and mortars raising the casualties, prayer seems more important than it did a week earlier. But time for prayer doesn't last long. With the 3rd Division ordered ashore, 60,000 Marines push north, straight into the mouth of the enemy. In this battle, there are no dramatic charges or sudden decisive victories, only an advance measured in inches and feet. And with every inch, the Japanese fight even harder. Even while the furious battle for Iwo Jime is being waged, 35 of the B-29 bombers limp in for emergency landings.
The Japanese were the most tenacious warriors. They would not give up. We were losing too many men trying to get a pillbox or an emplacement or a cave. We had flamethrowers attached to us for either blasting or blasting flame napalm.
Finally, by March 9th, most of the Japanese infantrymen defending the island had been driven into a northeast corner with nowhere to go but ocean. In one area, less than 2 square miles, the Japanese have 300 pillboxes, gun emplacements, and booby traps. Maneuvering is almost impossible. The only way to fight now is in face-to-face combat.
When one of your men, your buddies, gets it, you don't have time to sit there and cry about it. You got to keep moving. You got to leave him there, because the grave people come by and pick them up and take care of it.
There are too many casualties to continue frontal attacks, so flamethrowers burn out whatever the Marines can't bomb out. March 21st, 1945, General Kurabayashi radios Japanese troops on a nearby island. We have not eaten or drunk for 5 days, but our fighting spirit is still high. We are going to fight bravely to the end. 3 days later, his final words. To all officers and men, goodbye. Except for scattered pockets of resistance and sporadic raids from a few concealed Japanese, the Marines' battle for Iwo Jime is over. On March 28th, General Holland Smith officially declares Iwo Jime is secure.
They took us off the line. We got our first bath, which was in the ocean with saltwater soap, which leaves you sticky all over, but it was refreshing to get some of that scum off of it. In the 33 days we were there, we lost a total of almost 7,000 men killed or died of wounds, and we lost a little over 15,000 in wounded. So that's over a division of men that we've lost. We went aboard ship. The first couple of days, I just crawled into my bunk and I died. I think I must have slept for 18 hours straight. I dreamed that everybody was dead around me. And when I woke up and I heard the guys laughing and joking and cussing and smoking and playing poker and all of that, I wanted to get out of my bunk and run around, kiss and hug each one of them. I was just tickled to think they were alive.
After the war, Howard Baxter would return to graphic arts and become a scenic designer for major motion pictures at the MGM studio in Hollywood. But memories of Iwo Jime would last forever. With 27,000 lives lost, the most densely populated battleground becomes the most densely populated cemetery. Of the men who fought and died at Iwo Jime, Admiral Chester Nimitz said it best: uncommon valor was a common virtue. In 1944, as American troops marched into the heart of Italy, they endured many casualties from heavy German resistance. One of the greatest obstacles was at Gothic Line. U.S. forces needed help to break through the German defenses. Help came in an unlikely form: a battalion of Japanese Americans. While America fought the Japanese in the Pacific, some Japanese fought for America in Europe. Ted O'Hara was with the 442nd Battalion. It was here that he met the enemy on the battlefront. In January 1942, as a precautionary measure after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, 110,000 Japanese citizens and Japanese Americans are relocated from the West Coast to camps far inland. Japanese Americans already within the armed forces are classified non-combat and denied the right to fight for their country. Many of the dispossessed have lost their homes and businesses in the wake of anti-Japanese hysteria. In a turnabout on January 28, 1943, the War Department announces it will accept loyal Japanese American volunteers for combat from the continental United States. Ted O'Hara is one of 3,000 Japanese Americans who are accepted.
I was one of the first to volunteer. I want to prove myself that I'm American because there's so much discrimination back home at that time.
The all-Japanese 442nd Regimental Combat Team is formed at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Most of the men in this unit are American-born. They are called Nisei.
They form all the different companies, and they look at the background, and they say that, well, you're 5'9" or 5'10", you belong to the heavy weapon, and you know, all that. So I was assigned to the heavy weapon, machine gun.
Also absorbed into the unit is the already existing 100th Infantry Battalion, composed of Hawaiians of Japanese ancestry. In August 1943, the Hawaiian section is sent to the European theater, while the 442nd continues its training at Camp Shelby.
The training in our company was really severe, you know, intense. They really train us, and we have to take it. But in battle, we really benefit by that training. They hurried the 442 to join the 100 because they felt that all the Japanese Americans are real good fighters and loyal to the United States.
In Italy, the 100th Battalion proves itself as a tough fighting unit. From the rugged crossing of the Rapido River through Salerno and Anzio, and some of the bloodiest battles in southern France, the 100th is known for its motto, "Go for broke," a Nisei gambling term for shoot the works. The 442nd later adopts this saying as well. At the storming of the German-held monastery at Monte Cassino, the unit really distinguishes itself for bravery under fire. Even at a time when their civil liberties have been stripped from them at home, these men fight alongside other Americans and are willing to give their lives to prove their loyalty to the United States. June 10th, 1944, the 442nd arrives in Italy and rejoins the battle-tested 100th Battalion. The Nisei are immediately thrust into battle as they move through the rugged Italian countryside.
My first battle assignment was at Hill 140. That was my initiation under fire. A lot of people got hit. We were moving, hit the ground, and some of our friends just blown to bits.
Casualties are high from German resistance, and after several battles, the 100th and 442nd Battalions are pulled back from the front and moved to France.
We weren't trained for mountain fighting. Mountain fighting was new to us. Only thing, we follow orders, and we made the best of it. Right after we went down to southern France, we had all the reinforcement, and we had full strength. And we were there for about 3 months, I think, 3 months just regrouping. As far as the 442, we try to prove ourselves we're as good as the 100. That's what we try to do. The 100 was older people. And if they can do it, we can do it too. You know, that's the spirit we had. We were secretly, at night, transport from France to Italy, back to Italy.
Stretched across the rugged Apennine Mountains is the last German line of defense in northern Italy, the Gothic Line. Their strongest emplacement is on Mount Belvedere, which the Fifth Army has failed to take on 3 occasions during the winter, resulting in heavy losses.
From the German point of view, the mountains in north-central Italy, these were in effect the last easily defended terrain south of the valley of the River Po, with its important industrial cities. So from the German point of view, holding here was, to all intents and purposes, the last place that you could hold the Allies away from pouring through the plain of northern Italy and getting into and trying to take the passes into Germany. One of the reasons that the Germans were in a very difficult position was that the Allies, by this time, have essentially complete control of the air. The airplanes are in a position to come down low and attack German vehicles and personnel on the roads when they can see them in daytime.
The Allied battle plan calls for 2 diversionary attacks, one on either side of the Gothic Line, a few days apart, to draw German forces away from the center. Then, a week later, the major assault, ramrodding through the center of the line, straight for Bologna and command of the Po Valley. In March 1945, the 442nd moves to Livorno, Italy. It is to be part of the 92nd Division. The 442nd moves up to spearhead the diversionary attack on the left flank. The operation is to take place in less than a week. By now, their reputation as a top U.S. troubleshooting team has been solidly established.
We started at 4 o'clock. We had an Italian guide, and he knew exactly where the trail to get up to that mountain. We didn't know anything about the tactics or the plan that they were initiating. We didn't know anything. Nothing has been said to us. Only thing, orders came down, that we are going up the mountain and we're going to take that mountain. After taking that mountain, you take another mountain. And that's the order. So we just follow and we just keep on going.
April 5th, 1945, the big guns of the American artillery signaled the beginning of the 442nd's diversionary attack on the German Gothic line at the steep and rocky Mount Belvedere.
It's not an easy climb because I have weapons that I was carrying and I have to hold at one hand and climbing up. It was really tough.
In their defense of the Gothic line in the Italian mountains, German efforts were concentrated on field fortifications in the mountains, designed to slow down, hopefully to halt, any Allied breakthrough into the Po Valley.
In front of the 442nd lies Mount Belvedere and thousands of German troops who have had 5 months to build up their impenetrable defenses. April 5th, 1945, the U.S. 100th and 442nd Battalions set out for Mount Belvedere to create a break in the German Gothic line. Assigned the defense of Mount Belvedere is the crack Kesselring Machine Gun Battalion. These veteran German troops bar the way with a crossfire of mortar and machine gun fire.
The Germans are defending all of the higher elevations as best they can, on the assumption, obviously, that it is easier to shoot down than to climb up in the face of enemy fire. And under those circumstances, at Mount Belvedere and other peaks in the northern parts of the Apennine Mountains, the Germans are dug in, have their machine guns, mortars, and infantry weapons just below or at the top of the elevations, and are doing their best to fire down at whoever is trying to get up at them.
The only way the Allies can get through is for the 442nd to dislodge the gun emplacements in what they call a bonsai attack. The strategy is costly.
I didn't see not one person turn around and run back. Every one of them keep on moving forward. That's the reason why, for me, I can depend on my friend on the right, on my left. We together. I know that he's not going to run away. He's not going to run away and leave me all by myself. Or else me running away and leave him and we were taking off.
Later, in spite of heavy German reinforcements brought in from the center of the line, Mount Belvedere is taken.
When they succeed in capturing not only a position, but the surviving German soldiers in the position who surrender alive, whether wounded or not, for these German soldiers, needless to say, to be captured by Japanese when Japan is Germany's only remaining important ally seems rather weird.
On April 9th, the British 8th Army begins the second diversionary attack by striking at the Germans on the other end of the line. The main 5th Army attack through the center of the German line is held up because of bad weather. The 442nd continues to spearhead forward so quickly that their supply columns can't keep up.
We were short of food. In fact, our kitchen caught up with us, and that's when we got our sea ration. And then we started moving again to Milan. So we were moving real fast. I don't know about the others, you know, the British and the other American division they were moving too, I guess, you know, because the Germans were disorganized already. When the 442 broke that line and started moving and spreading, the whole U.S. force began to move because there's no resistance. They were moving back. So, Germans, I think they were in chaos. They were just running.
With Mount Belvedere taken, the Germans are under attack at both ends of the Gothic line. The major push through the middle has caught them off balance. In a desperate attempt to prevent a complete breach in the line, the 90th Panzer Grenadier Division is rushed to the front. It's the last German reserve division in Italy, and it is committed after only 1 day of fighting. Within 3 days of the main attack, the Gothic line begins to crumble. The American 5th Army takes command of the high ground. This is the key to the entire Po Valley. Allied bombers called flying fortresses pound the hillsides to loosen up German holding positions. The mountainous region makes retreat difficult.
The other side of the German interest in defending this last mountain line, Gothic line in Italy, was that behind them was not just a plain, but a plain with a big river running through it. And therefore, once the German line was broken, the primary concern both of officers and men was to get to this river and across it before advancing Allied spearheads seized the bridges. Because if that happened, those caught on the south side of the Po River were going to end up in open terrain with no opportunity to defend themselves, and they were either going to have to surrender or be mowed down.
The German retreat is made more difficult because it is on foot. The withdrawing armies cannot move as quickly as the approaching Allies. When the German tanks run out of gasoline, they are blown up and weapons are destroyed so the enemy will not get them. This is a portrait of an army in defeat.
Once the Gothic line is broken, there is, so to speak, a race for the Pearl River crossings between German troops trying to get across and maybe build up some kind of defense on the north side of the river, and Allied forces trying to get crossings as quickly as possible, both to keep the Germans from defending the north shore of the river and to cut off and capture all those left on the south side of the river. At this last stage of the war, the German soldiers were in a terrible situation. A very, very large number of them lose their lives in the last fighting. It's too often forgotten that a couple of million German soldiers die in the last year of World War II. On the other hand, very, very large numbers of soldiers surrender, and once surrendered, with minute exceptions, survive as prisoners of war, and in the end return to Germany after half a year or a year or two of being prisoners of war.
On April 29th, the German High Command in Italy agrees to a full surrender, effective May 2nd. In just 19 days, the Allies have driven from the Apennines to the Alps and have brought the war in Italy to an end. The 100th and 442nd Battalions have proven their value to the American fighting forces by distinguishing themselves in the Italian campaign. By the time they return home, they have received 18,413 individual decorations, including over 9,000 Purple Hearts and 7 presidential citations, more than any other unit in history. President Truman, awarding them their 7th citation for their role in the Gothic Line campaign, says at the time, "You are now on your way home. You fought not only the enemy, but you fought prejudice, and you won." By 1944, American forces were successfully retaking islands from Japanese occupation armies in the Central Pacific. Although there had been costly battles, each island was part of the master plan to push towards Japan. As soon as a beachhead was established, it was the Seabees who came ashore to turn the island into an advance base. Bob Jacobs was a civilian with the Seabees in the Central Pacific, on the battlefront. In 1942, the Japanese follow up their sneak attack on Pearl Harbor with a methodical occupation and fortification of strategic islands in the Pacific. They import thousands of slave laborers to construct elaborate defenses on each island. They build gun emplacements and bomb shelters in the form of cement bunkers and caves.
The Japanese turned probably thousands of islands in the Pacific into bases that they captured. They started doing this early in 1942 when they were really succeeding in the war against the United States. And the Imperial General Headquarters made a plan for sort of a series of concentric rings of defensive positions. By September of 1943, when the Japanese, for example, had been defeated and had to give up the island of Guadalcanal in the South Pacific, and the American Navy was threatening Rabaul, they pulled back.
With the Japanese on the defensive, American productivity and war materials explodes. Every kind of supply imaginable is rerouted to help the war effort. Warehouses and industrial yards brim with the products that are needed to keep a massive army on the move. Innovation becomes a key word in the delivery of materials to forces in the Pacific. Containers must be watertight. Men are trained to build harbors from scratch on foreign shores. Metal boxes of high buoyancy are connected together to form what is known as a rhino barge, powered by huge outboard motors that will rush critical loads to combat beaches. Civilian engineers and craftsmen are enlisted into a special Navy construction battalion, the Seabees. One volunteer is Bob Jacobs.
I was in the what is called the 75th Seabees. That's a Naval Construction Battalion. And I went in as a petty officer second class, as a metalsmith. We used the nickname Seabee, S-E-A-B-E-E. We landed in Davisville, Rhode Island, and got all of our equipment there. What we had to do was a lot of exercise, a close order drill in that, in order to make darn sure that we knew how to follow orders. And did combat work for judo and bayonet practice. As far as trade training is concerned, we knew that. We got on board ship on a Saturday afternoon, and we left that afternoon. There was 6 troop carriers and approximately 6 or 7 destroyers. And we started away, and everybody was in a gay old mood, you know. And it was like taking a trip, that's all it was. We were with the Marine Battalion, and the Marines were starting their engines on the Jeeps every 3 or 4 hours to make sure that they were in working order.
After 1943, the Japanese consolidate their forces on the islands they feel they can hold. In creating this basic line of defense, they abandon the support of some island groups. One of these is the Marshall Islands and the central atoll of Kwajalein, located 2,500 miles west of Hawaii. This tiny outpost in the Pacific is an ideal location from which to launch American bombing raids and to provide bomber pilots with an emergency landing strip. Because of enormous losses in the battles for Guadalcanal and Tarawa, Admiral Nimitz assembles a massive fighting force of 42,000 men. The 4th Marine Division will strike 2 northern islands. The 7th Army Division will assault Kwajalein.
In comparison to other island strongholds, for example, like Guadalcanal in the south or Rabaul, Kwajalein and the Marshall Islands generally were more lightly defended. The others had been really reinforced and fortifications built much more effectively sooner. The Japanese had 2 clumps of forces on Kwajalein. At the 2 northernmost islets, which were called Roy and Namur, they had about 3,500 troops. And in the south, on the island of Kwajalein itself, they had another 4,000. So they had about 7,900 troops on the coral atoll that is called Kwajalein.
At the end of January 1944, unrelenting air power descends on Kwajalein. More than 6,000 missions are flown, dropping over 1,100 tons of bombs to wipe out the resistance. The Japanese on this particular island are at a disadvantage.
In contrast to places like Guadalcanal, where there are hills to take, or Palau, where you could make caves and hide underneath them, that kind of thing. You can't do that. It's basically flat, and the water table is very high. So you can't really dig in very well.
On January 31st, the direct assault on Kwajalein, Operation Flintlock, begins.
The ships opened up, and in order to soften the landing. And the Marines went in on the first wave, and they used regular ship Navy coxswains on the LCVPs. That's a landing craft vehicle personnel. What happened was that when the Armada came in, then the Marines came ashore and stormed the beach.
With their limited natural defenses, the Japanese on Kwajalein are unable to withstand the intense shelling.
Their basic idea was to, if they could, repulse the attackers at the beach. They retreated, and again, because we're talking about such tiny land area, there's no place to retreat to, which is one of the fundamental reasons why the Japanese will fight literally to the death.
The Japanese lob whatever artillery they can. A landing craft loaded with supplies is one of their direct hits. Tons of material go up in smoke. Meanwhile, a perimeter is established from the landing positions.
Kwajalein was not supplied well at all. In December of 1943, Admiral Koga was told, you can't have any more men, you can't have any more ships, you're just going to have to make do with what you've got. And this, of course, left the garrison on Kwajalein with very limited supplies. They can't fight a long, protracted battle. They didn't have any air cover. That's a major factor in the battle. Before the Americans land, we've pounded the island from carrier-based aircraft, overwhelmingly. So they don't have any, air cover. Number two, the Japanese do not have any sizable number of ships there. There's no, body of ships sitting in the lagoon that could rescue these troops.
The battle to secure the beach has been relatively simple, with little resistance. But there are always casualties in the smoothest of operations. With a protected perimeter, it is time for the Seabees to land and bring ashore the supplies they will need to build a base.
I wasn't a fighter, I was a civilian. And as a result, we knew that the Marines were going to protect us. And the Navy's airplanes were there and the Navy ships were there. So it didn't really bother me at all. General duties were virtually everything. The first thing they had to do was cut the logs down out of the way in order to prepare the airstrip. After they cleared it, the bulldozers would come in and level it off. Then the shovels were out in the water, getting coral, which then was laid down on the beach. When that was laid down, then the bulldozers and the rollers would come by and squeeze out all the water and get it a hard pack. And then they put what we called pierce planking, which was interlocking steel planks that they would put down on top of that for the runway. The commander of our battalion was an engineer who had very little military experience, but he was very, very, very savvy as far as being able to lay out whatever had to be developed on the island.
By the end of day one, the soldiers of the 7th Army are able to relax and restore their energy. The battle to take the rest of the island lies ahead. January 31st, 1944. American ships pound the Marshall Islands atoll of Kwajalein, and the 7th Army is sent ashore to establish a beachhead. On the same day, the Seabees begin unloading supplies.
When the ships were still in, then we were unloading gasoline tanks, 55-gallon drums of gasoline, and supplies for the Marine base that was there. We did that for several days. There was some sniper action, and at least one of our Seabees was killed.
The Japanese definitely tried to interfere with Seabee operations. Seabees were used literally with tractors to pull in heavy loads of ammunition. Individual Japanese would run out, and they jumped onto these Caterpillar tractors that were pulling ammunition in.
While the Seabees are doing their part, the fighting forces push forward to take more of the island. There are isolated skirmishes as the Americans proceed. The Japanese, undermanned and undersupplied, nevertheless fight fiercely. They retreat and wait for the next attack.
Japanese troops on Kwajalein knew, once they saw the American armada coming at them, that they were enormously outnumbered. And so, just in terms of holding out as long as they could, it was better for them in a way to wait at night when presumably they would be less visible. They might have some chance. The Americans might be tired, people relax at night, a little bit, more off guard, so that they could mount these very small, we're talking about 50 men maximum, attacks against the positions that the Americans were holding.
Stand by. Fire!
As day breaks, the soldiers make more headway, forcing the Japanese to retreat further. With the battle going on, the base is being built.
We set up gasoline farms, fuel tanks. There were metalsmiths and carpenters and electricians, plumbers, virtually everything was there. Everybody was there. And so we had a full complement of journeymen that could take care of virtually any kind of problem that came up. Everything that happened was laid out probably months before in order to get the supplies and the material and the equipment that we were going to need in order to establish a beachhead and in order to neutralize the island.
In a matter of days, the Navy Construction Battalion is able to erect a self-sufficient harbor and village with every possible necessity. This highly organized, skilled unit makes it possible for the military to wage the Pacific War.
We set up a full camp of tents, and then we built our own mess area. We had a double mess hall, was made out of Philippine teak wood. We had some of the best equipment there. Later on, we built giant Quonset huts for purpose of storage for future invasions and going into Japan.
There is another enemy the Seabees come prepared to fight: disease. With as many soldiers on Pacific Islands becoming casualties of illness as enemy fire, precautions are taken to limit the exposure of men who need their health to fight the Japanese.
In general, the Japanese have been propagandized to think of the Americans as two things, really: beasts or demons, kind of like ogres that were going to come out of hell or someplace. The Marines would be tattooed on their arm or on their chest. Japanese could see them, and this made them think that they were something like the Yakuza, the criminal gangsters in Japan, real tough guys. Initially, they had hopes that they'd be able to stop the Americans at the beaches, but that proved false very, very quickly. And once that happened, it's basically over. It's one of the reasons why it's relatively speaking, a short battle, not a long, drawn-out thing like Guadalcanal, where the Japanese can resist for a long, long time and the battle goes on for months. I think all we can say about the Japanese reaction to being bombed with napalm is it must have been terribly frightening, devastating. Again, there's no place you can go.
Thousands of spent shell cases testify to the horrific pounding the Japanese are taking.
So the Japanese are just, wiped out, either in the aerial bombardment or in trying to defend against slightly less than 42,000 Americans out of the total of roughly 7,900. All but 256 die.
Bomber planes use the landing strip as soon as it is completed. Pilots gather to swap stories about their latest encounters. It becomes a social spot in between the daily duties of war. Fighter planes that have been shot up in battle can be repaired and patched. Those beyond help go to the salvage dump to be cannibalized. Their spare parts are a precious commodity in the middle of the Pacific.
The smarter among the Japanese saw in losing Kwajalein and losing the Marshall Islands, the Americans get a base 2,500 miles further west of Hawaii where they can base land-based air, which is closer to Guam, the next inner ring of Japan's defenses, which, again, begins to pose a threat to Guam and the islands close to Japan.
Fighter planes take to the air to attack other Japanese islands and ships in the area. They often run into enemy planes. Japanese freighter ships are attacked, American pilots not only prevent supplies from getting to the enemy, they keep the Imperial Navy's Air Force busy as well. But the Japanese fight back on the seas with their bombers and kamikaze pilots who give their lives to protect the empire by crashing into an American destroyer. In 5 seconds, a suicide plane carrying 1,000 pounds of explosives strapped to it turns a ship into debris. In just 4 days, Kwajalein is taken with minimal losses, and 3 weeks for the entire Marshall Islands group. The Marines and soldiers return to their ships to head for another battle.
Losing Kwajalein showed the Japanese that the Americans could take an island like this without a protracted, drawn-out battle like had occurred at Guadalcanal or Tarawa. This is a very efficient, sort of overwhelming operation.
A break is called for, it's okay to keep the boys all right. no use to sing the blues, boys, we're moving out tonight. Get your gear on, we're moving out again. Keep your 5-pace intervals and keep your voices thin. It's the word we hate to hear when we lay down all our gear. Get your gear on, we're moving out again. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4.
The Marines made a huge sign. It said, when we reach the Isle of Japan, with our hats at our jaunty tilt, we'll march through the streets of Tokyo on roads that the sea be built.